For over 1,000 years, if you asked someone, hey, what does it mean to be a good person? The answer was pretty simple. It came from one place. But what happens when that answer gets challenged? Not by some outside force, but from within. Well, that's what we're digging into today. We're going to see how two of the greatest minds in history wrestled with faith, reason, and the very idea of what makes someone good or evil.
So let's start with that big question. What does it mean to be a good person? I mean, it's a question we're still trying to figure out, right? Is it about following a set of rules passed down from on high? Or is it about using this brain of ours to figure out what's right on our own? To get some perspective, let's jump in our time machine and see how they tackled this exact problem in the medieval world. And to really get their answers, we have to understand their world. We're talking about the Middle Ages. And for a full millennium, the church wasn't just an institution, it was the institution. It shaped absolutely everything about life, politics, and how people thought.
Now, this era covers a huge stretch of time. We're talking from the fall of the Western Roman Empire all the way to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. 1,000 years. The easiest way to think about it is in two big chunks. You've got the High Middle Ages, which is when the whole feudal system was at its peak, and then the Low Middle Ages, when that system started to change in some really big ways.
And the one word you need to know to understand this whole period is theocentrism. This wasn't just a religious belief. It was the operating system for reality. The idea was that God is the absolute center of everything. He's the cause, the architect, the director of the entire show. So whether you had a great harvest or a terrible plague, it was all seen as part of God's plan. And this slide right here gives you a pretty good snapshot of what life was actually like under the feudal system. See, power wasn't in one central government. It was spread out all over the place, with lords ruling their own little domains from their castles. Society was mostly rural, and life revolved around these estates, where everything was structured, predictable, and tied to the land. And this social structure wasn't just an accident. They believed it was ordered by God himself. Everyone had their place. You had the clergy, whose job was to pray for everyone. You had the nobility, the warriors who fought to protect everybody. And then you had, well, everyone else, the peasantry, who did all the work. And the glue holding this whole thing together, the incredible cultural and spiritual power of the church. So it's in this world, a world just soaked in faith, that we meet our first philosophical heavyweight, Augustine of Hippo. He was a leading voice in what's called the patristic tradition. Basically, these were the early church fathers who had the massive job of building a solid Christian philosophy, blending scripture with ideas from the ancient Greeks. Now, Augustine's philosophy isn't just abstract stuff. It's deeply personal. Before he became a saint, he lived a pretty wild life, full of intellectual and moral struggles. But then, one day, in the middle of a personal crisis, he heard a child's voice chanting, "Take up and read, take up and read." He grabbed a Bible, opened it to a random page, and the words he saw just hit him like a lightning bolt, like a direct message from God. And that moment changed everything for him. So, Augustine was a huge fan of the Greek philosopher Plato. You might remember, Plato had this idea of two worlds, the messy, imperfect physical world we see around us, and a perfect, eternal world of ideas. Well, Augustine took this concept and gave it a Christian spin. He talked about two cities, the earthly city of man, which is all about love of self and worldly things, and the spiritual city of God, which is driven by love of God and a search for eternal truth. And that brings us right to the heart of his ethics. For Augustine, being a good person means pointing your whole life toward the city of God. The goal of life is happiness, sure, but he argued that real, lasting happiness can only be found in God. This means the soul is way more important than the body. And, this is the big one, faith is superior to our own limited human reason. Okay, let's fast forward a few centuries. The world is starting to look a little different. As we move into the low Middle Ages, the intellectual scene is buzzing with new energy, and that sets the stage perfectly for our second giant of medieval philosophy, Thomas Aquinas. Trade is picking up, cities are growing, and a brand new invention is taking off, the university. These became these amazing hubs for learning and debate. And then, something huge happened. The forgotten works of Aristotle, a master of logic and observing the natural world, were rediscovered thanks to Arab scholars who had preserved them. It was a complete game changer. This flood of new ideas led to a new way of thinking called scholasticism. You can think of it like building a cathedral, but with ideas. The goal was to use super rigorous logic and debate to build a rational Christian philosophy, one that could tackle questions that Scripture alone didn't fully answer. It was this incredible attempt to understand God's creation by using our own minds.
And this is where Thomas Aquinas comes in. His mission was, well, it was massive. Where Augustine, following Plato, said you have to first believe so that you can understand, Aquinas, inspired by Aristotle, basically flipped the script. He argued that we should use our reason to understand the world, and that understanding will actually make our belief stronger.
For example, to prove God exists, Aquinas didn't just point to the Bible. He turned to cold, hard logic. He came up with his famous 5 ways, 5 arguments based on just observing the world. Take the first one, the first mover. We see stuff moving all the time, right? Well, anything that's moving must have been pushed by something else. But you can't have an infinite chain of pushes going back forever. Logically, there has to be a first mover, something that started all the motion without being moved itself. And that, Aquinas said, is what people call God. So how does this affect ethics? For Aquinas, being a good person was a rational project. He believed God gave us reason as a tool to figure things out and navigate the world. The ultimate goal was still happiness in God, just like for Augustine. But for Aquinas, reason was the compass that helps you get there. Faith doesn't throw reason out, it perfects it. It lights up the truths that our reason alone can't quite reach.
So what we end up with are 2 really profound but very different paths to living a good life. They're both pointing to the same ultimate destination, God, but the routes they map out are worlds apart. Let's just put it all side by side. You have Augustine, who's all about Plato. His key idea is that faith comes first, before reason. So for him, the path to being good is an inward journey, turning away from the world to focus on the soul's direct line to God. Then you have Aquinas, who's Team Aristotle. He says faith and reason work together. His path is an outward one, using our intellect to explore and understand the world God made, and through that, getting to know God better.
And this tension, this debate between the leap of faith on one hand and the exploration of logic on the other, it didn't just stay in the Middle Ages, not by a long shot. Augustine and Aquinas basically laid down the philosophical tracks for arguments about ethics, religion, and even science that we are still debating today.
Which, brings it all back home to a question that's just as real for us now as it was 1,000 years ago. Is living a good, meaningful life about a pure act of faith? Is it something you can figure out with logic and reason alone? Or is the real secret in finding that delicate and, let's be honest, often really difficult balance between the 2?